Hello, I'm Glenn Smith. This is my third video that I've done. My first previous two was around planning drone flights, planning a job, where to fly a drone safely. This one is round about my entire workflow from filming to editing. I'm also going to cover things around shutter speed, ISO, exposure, frame rates, what frame rates to use. Now this is how I produce a video. I'm not saying it's the right way, but it works for me. To help me do it today, I've enlisted the help of my trusty mountain bike, just there. And I'll keep seeing you along the way. See you shortly. Frame rates. Now we're in a European country and we work on a PAL system, which is 25 frames a second, 50 frames a second, but I shoot in NTSC, which gives me 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second, 120 frames a second. So you just give me a little bit more flexibility around the slowing things down at different speeds. Now that will become an issue if I get shot inside, but because it's outdoors today, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's NTSC or PAL frame rates. So I tend to use 3 frame rates: 24, 30 and 60. Now I use 24 if it's any clips that's got audio or speaking on it, because that is what will set me the timeline of my project when I render it out. The next one I'll shoot is 30 frames a second, which just slightly slows down footage, gives it a really nice dreamy effect, but doesn't quite look slow-mo. And if I do want something a bit more slow motion, I use 60 frames a second or even 120 frames a second. Did you spot that? I'd like to say it was a deliberate mistake, but it wasn't. Unfortunately, this clip was filmed in 30 frames a second. Now, with it having audio on it, and I've pulled it into a 24 frame a second timeline, means I can't slow it down. So you will see it's slightly juttery every now and again. The reason for this is because obviously it's at 30 frames a second, so the software is having to drop 6 frames every second, which gives it a slightly jerky effect. So I've used this to show you an example of what happens if you do it wrong. Normally I would go out and refilm this, but I just thought I'd use it so I could just show you. The next clip you're going to see with me coming down the hill on the bike is correct at 60 frames a second. The clip after is actually at 30 frames a second, so you'll see the same effect on that. Now this next clip you're going to see, I'm going to film this in 60 frames a second, and you'll see me coming down this hill just behind me, and I'll just do a speed ramp so you can see the slow motion effect. 60 frames a second going from normal speed, and it should be nice and smooth, not jittery, and you should get a good effect. From that clip now, that's in 60 frames a second with a speed ramp on it. Okay, now you might ask yourself, how do I know what frame rate I'm going to be shooting? Well, the simple fact is you need to plan it. Like all my previous videos, the most important thing about any video that you do is planning. And in advance you might think, right, this clip is going to have speaking on it, so that's going to be 24 frames a second. This clip is going to be no speaking, just a bit of B-roll, looks nice in 30 frames a second, slow down to 24. And then you might think ahead, think, right, I want to do this clip as a slow motion clip. And that's kind of how then you can kind of plan ahead and know what shots you're going to do. Now you might also ask, what's wrong with just filming everything in 60 frames a second? Now there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that, and that does give you things to capture at short notice. You think I'll slow that bit down. But the trouble with 60 frames a second, it can give you some slightly unnatural looking movement if there's a lot of action in it, whereas 24 frames a second is the industry standard for cinematic. Now cinematic, I use that word a lot with videography. What does it mean? The honest answer is, don't know. All I know is my footage are trying to get smooth, looking nice to the eye, motion blur correct. Now if that's what cinematic means, then yeah, cinematics, that's what I'm trying to do. One key thing to talk about is shutter speed. Okay, now the general rule is your shutter speed should be twice that of your frame rate. This has come from something called the 180-degree rule, which is taken from the old cinema cameras that used to have a 180-degree shutter angle, but it gives you the nice motion blur, and it's a ratio of your frame rate to your shutter speed. So if you're shooting at 24 frames a second, it'll be 1/48. If you're shooting at 30 frames a second, it'll be 1/60, and 60 frames a second, 1/120, and it just gives you that nice motion blur. Now I ask you, why can't you just bump up the shutter speed to a really high rate? It'll give you some unnatural movement. Let me just show you in a little experiment. Now, this bike wheel is going to show you this experiment. I've got the shutter frame set to 1/2000. Okay, so now if I turn that wheel, it's quite an unnatural movement. There's not a lot of motion blur. It's not pleasing to the eye. The eye likes motion blur, and that just doesn't. It's not nice to watch. Now the next clip I'll show you is using twice the shutter speed. Okay, now you see this clip. This is shown on 24 frames a second with a 1/50 shutter speed. You can see it's just much more pleasing. You get some natural motion blur in there, and it just looks right to the eye. That brings us nicely onto exposure. Now, the first thing with that is ISO. You need to film in the lowest ISO you can get away with. It just reduces the amount of noise in it. If you're indoors, you can increase your ISO. You can increase that different amounts depending on your quality of camera. But yeah, generally keep the ISO as low as possible. So you can ask yourself, now, if my ISO is low and my shutter speed is really low, how do I control the light? Now you control the light with sunglasses. Not that kind of sunglasses, this kind of sunglasses. It's an ND filter. Okay, now this is what you can use to control your light into the lens. So you can make it darker to allow less light in, which lets you film at much slower shutter speeds. That combined with your f-stop, you can increase your f-stop, which will also let in less light. But then if you do want a nice blurry background, you do need a low f-stop. So one of these is crucial, and I always film in one of these if you can do. And that should give you nice exposed footage. Okay, nearly done. All the footage is pretty much taken. Firstly, apologise for my sweating. I decided to do a vlog on the bike on the hottest day of the year. So yes, there has been lots of sweating involved today. But hopefully the footage should be good. We're going to get back into the office and edit it in DaVinci. So I'll show you my workflow next, so keep tuned and I'll show you that part of it. The most important thing, one of the most important things with taking video is creating a story. You can have the most interesting subject. If you haven't got a story, it can be a boring video and you don't keep people watching your videos. You can have the most boring subject. If you build it into a story, it keeps people gripped. So this is where the important part of the planning comes into creating a video. So yeah, just please plan it before, take everything into account and really give it a good story so people like to watch your video. Now, as I said, stay tuned. We're going to go over to DaVinci next, back in the office. Have we finished filming now? I ain't doing a mountain bike again. My horse is killing. Leave bike there, I'm walking home. Hello, thanks for keeping tuned. I feel a little bit fresher now and I recovered from the bike ride during the shoot. So I'm now showered and we can shortly head off into DaVinci Resolve to start editing the files. I just want to show a little bit on the editing workflow, mixing the frame rates of 60 frames a second, 30 frames a second, 24 frames per second. And now some of the files that I did take was on the Lumix S5, which has a 10-bit 422 format. Now the DaVinci Resolve I use is a free version and it doesn't support that for the free version, so I have to convert them to Apple ProRes to use them. But that's a separate thing and I've already done that. So it's we'll head off into DaVinci now. So please stay tuned and I'll just catch up with you shortly. Okay, now we're in DaVinci. I've not brought all the files in, but I've just brought 3 of the files that I'm going to use. Now these 3 files, I've got one that's in 24 frames a second, one that's in 30 frames a second, and one that's in 60 frames a second. You can click on each one in turn and you can play it and just preview it on the screen. Like that. So a couple of ways you can do it, this to change the speed, but before we go and do any of that, I want you to go into the project settings. So down to project settings, and I'm going to change first I'm going to change the timeline resolution. Now normal resolution is 16:9, but I prefer to use 16:8, which is 2:1, and it just fits the screen better. You get some quite narrow bars top and bottom, but with the 16:9 for some reason it gives bars either side, and it also seems to fit mobile phones better. So 3840 will come to 1920. Frame rate is 23.976. Leaving video margin just to HD, it flows smoother. And I've set my timeline frame rate to that 23.976. So everything that pull onto that timeline will be that. Now one thing that I will have to do at some point is fill the clips to the new timeline ratio. If you see the blackboard left and right, but we can come across that later on. And now you see, as I touch on each one of these videos, you can see that it's got 23.976, 29.97 and 59.94. Now what I can do, I can right click on each one and then go to clip attributes. I can do all at once as well. So we're going to go set frame rate to that stays as it is. Then this one goes to clip attribute, make this one 23.976, okay, and also make this one clip attributes, $23.976. Or you can select them all at once and do it exactly the same way. Clip attributes 23.976. So now that will automatically, now if I pull these onto the timeline, if I say that's that one, that'll be normal speed. Deal. I've done. My first previous tour was around planning drone flights. And then if I pull the next one in, now this one should be slight slow motion, very slight. It's probably oddly noticeable. Just skip forward a bit. It's just a very slight. And then if I go to the last clip, pull that one onto the timeline. And this will be really slow motion at 60 frames a second. Okay, now I'm going to do it a slightly different way. Now that's the simplified way to do it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do now, get rid of them all. I'm going to trim the clip to what I need it to be. Apologies for my face on the screen. This is my my third video that I've done. My first previous two was around planning drone flights, planning a job, video. So the first previous two was around planning set me in point, with the help of my set me out points, just a mountain bike, just there. And I'll keep seeing you along the way. See you shortly. Okay, and then I'll just drag that into the timeline. I always leave a little bit of gap at the start. Then go to the end. Now the next one, same again, just preview it and just see what kind of bits I need. Don't need it all, just keep it a short clip. Move a bit further on. We'll set an in point, set an out point. Now this next one, I'm actually going to revert this back to 59.9 and I'm going to slow down the speed a slightly different way. So I'm going to make it back up to the 59.94 and I'm going to click on the clip and I'm going to get the section I want to use, which will be there to there. I've already got that and I'm going to drag it into the timeline. This is still at 60 frames a second. Now it may play a little bit choppy, not ideal. If you look, it's just a little bit jumpy. Yeah, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to set something called a speed ramp. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change the whole speed. I'm going to reduce it slightly. So if I'm going to change clip speed, I'm going to make it 80%, which should tie in with the 24 frames per second timeline. So that'll slow it down partially. If I want to add a speed ramp, so it slows it down even more for a small section of it, so it's not as boring to watch and it will just slow it down about there. I'll right click on it and then go to retime controls. From retime controls it brings up this extra bar. So from there I've got my vertical line there. I'm going to click on 100. I'm going to add a speed point and I'm going to move there till the end and I'll probably just there add a speed point again there. So it's split into 3 sections. So now I can change the speed of each of these 3 sections itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to slow this section down to 40%, which will make it a 24 frames a second clip. Move out of the way so I can see it. So 40% of 60 frames is 24 frames a second. Now you'll see it's come down. It's come at a slight slow motion, and it comes closer. It slows down much more, shows the sound, then speeds up again for the last bit. Now I don't want it to be a harsh slow down that, so it's not going from normal speed to slow motion then back to normal speed abruptly. So what I can do now, if I click on retime curve, it'll bring up a separate row just below it with this almost like this line underneath. Now we don't want that line. We're going to click on retime frame and then uncheck the retime frame and click on retime speed. Now it brings up this line now. So this shows you where it's going normal speed, slow-mo, normal speed. Now what I can do, if I click on each one of these control points and change the symbol to that, click on that control point, change the symbol, it can give you a more gradual speed now, so it's not a sharp turn, it's slow in and slow out. So same again, it comes down and slow-mo to go past, then back up to normal speed to fade out, and that's a speed ramp. Okay, so we can uncheck them now just to make it a bit clearer. So get rid of that. I can get rid of. Now what I probably will do at the beginning is I might put just a little bit of a jump cut just to make the first bit a little bit more interesting. Sorry, I keep jumping back to that. So I might put a jump cut in round about here, and the jump cut is just a little clip, just cut that, take a bit further forward, about there, cut that, then we'll just delete that out. So it just, because now I just quite like using jump cuts, so as it goes forward, it'll jump, then you'll see the slow-mo. It just keeps these clips short, but it still keeps it of interest. Right, now I spoke about earlier about fitting these clips into the timeline. Okay, as you can see there, we've still got the black bars either side. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back into video. If we click on the clip, because these are being filmed at 16:9 on my camera, if I click on scaling and fill, and it'll just fill it to the screen. There's various options. Fill, you lose very small amount of quality. Fit will do a similar thing. Crop will basically crop it, so you'll end up losing some of the image. Or stretch will stretch it, which can distort the image a little bit. But you can see there, that just looks quite nice. And I'll do that for all my clips, same way. You can select them all in one go, and it should remember it. So select them all, scale in, fill, and that's done them all. Okay. Right, so they're rendering out. This is really brief rendering out. So same again, you go to your deliver tab. I'm not going through any color grading or anything like that. I'm just going to show you the basics of it. So the rendering out, you need to make sure if you're in 4K, so set your title 4K test, we'll have it as a MP4. The custom needs to match what your timeline is, and if I'm rendering 4K, I always set this to restrictor, and I make that around about 90,000. If you're doing 1080p, make that around about 30,000, and then add to render queue. We'll save that there, and then hit render to start the video, and that's it. That will give you, that's the basics of how to pull in the different frame rates onto the different timeline and just keep it all nice and smooth, and the slow-mo nice and smooth and not jerky. You've got to be careful. You've got to try and stick to your ratios. It's about maths, so stick to your ratios so they match the timeline that you're using as your base timeline. And thank you very much. And that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. I hope you got plenty of information out of it and give you plenty to get on with to help you making your videos and getting in a bag, editing them, have a bit of fun with it. If you did like this video, please hit the like button and please subscribe. I have got more videos planned for the future. and hopefully you'll join in to watch them and enjoy them too. Thank you. Goodbye.